We've all seen the trailers for Five Nights at Freddy's, but just because you have eyes doesn't mean you always see. In this video, let's break down everything we've missed in the trailers and carefully review FNaF's most overlooked media. Five Nights at Freddy's wasn't intentionally planned as a franchise, so the trailer for the first game shouldn't have much to tell us about the story, right? Wrong. As soon as this trailer opens up, there's one thing that immediately stands out. It's implied that the restaurant is open during the events of the game. There are definitely hints of this in the game, such as the dining room being set up for a party and Phone Guy referring to the restaurant as a place where fantasy and fun come to life in the present tense. But if we had paid more attention to the trailers, we would have known this before the game even released. Not only do we see Freddy and his bandmates on stage as children cheer in the background, but we see the words, "During the day, it's a place of joy, but you aren't here during the day," confirming that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is indeed open during the events of FNAF 1. This leads us to question when the restaurant finally closed. Remember, Mike Smith was fired after completing the custom night, so we don't know exactly when the restaurant went under from there. With Phone Guy's death on night 4, the company might have taken note of his disappearance and closed the restaurant, but we can't really know for sure. After all, Fazbear Entertainment isn't known as the most considerate company. Before we see the band together on the main show stage, we see Freddy in the opening scene seeming to be standing on the stage alone. This setting is noticeably darker than the other shot of the stage, and along with Chica and Bonnie, the clouds and other decorations seem to be missing. Of course, this could simply be an early render before all of the decorations were added, but a reference to this scene actually made it into the finished game. In the West Hall corner shown on Cam 2B, there's a Let's Party poster showing Freddy on the same barren stage in a frame that's taken directly from this clip in the trailer. So this scene seems to be canon, meaning that at some point before the show area was complete with a decorated backdrop, Freddy may have stood on stage alone. The lack of lighting and decoration hints that the restaurant was still under construction at the time, with Freddy being the first animatronic installed on the stage. This doesn't really explain why he appears to be splitting his head in half in this Easter egg, but hey, everyone's doing it. Freddy also appears to be powering on in this shot, unlike the later shot of the stage which begins with the characters already in motion. This combined with the sound of children cheering, the same audio that plays at 6 AM after the completion of a night, could mean that the restaurant used to open at 6 AM, which is why the night guard shift ends at that time and why Freddy appears to be powering on. Looking at Freddy's hand in these shots of him on stage, we can see that he is slightly damaged, having spots of missing fabric on the inside and outside of his hand. Other than Foxy, who is in severe disrepair, Freddy appears to be the only animatronic with any cosmetic damage. This may have been changed before the game was released, as some images of Freddy seem to show him with an undamaged hand, although admittedly it's hard to find a good picture of his hand since he's mostly seen from the midsection up, you know, like when he... In FNAF 3's Hidden Trivia, which I discussed in my Easter egg video, we learned that Freddy was not originally meant to move around the restaurant at all. His role was simply to get the player if they ran out of time. This could explain why Freddy appears to be separated from the other animatronics in this shot and why he's a bit more damaged than the others. He could have originally been out of order like Foxy, although the early promotional material for FNAF 1 really emphasized that there were machines behind the animal mascots, which could be why Scott chose to design Freddy this way. You can also hear the very faint sound of music in this shot, significantly drowned out by children's cheers. It's almost impossible to hear this song, so as much as I'd like to know what it is, we'll likely never know. But don't worry, if Scott ever agrees to do an interview, I'll find out for us. This scene shows the animatronics on the main stage turning to face the camera, which, like several features shown in this trailer, never made it into the game. Now, some fans claim to have seen the screen in the game, with some even alleging that it was only in the mobile version, but it was never actually in the game to begin with. This misconception most likely stems from the fact that it appears in the trailer, and although much of what is showcased was cut from the game, it is pretty similar to a real Easter egg where Freddy can turn to face the camera, but this only happens after Bonnie and Chica have left the stage. This screen was featured in many early Easter egg videos, which likely facilitated the spread of this simply false claim. In this shot, Bonnie stands at the end of the West Hall and runs towards the camera. While not exactly the same as what we see in the trailer, a similar feature did appear in the game, with Foxy running down the hall instead of Bonnie. This could be because Foxy wasn't created yet, and as we see in the finished game, Bonnie has a lot of unique scenes already. Bonnie even has the largest role in this trailer, with more scenes than Freddy and Chica combined. Interestingly, Chica doesn't have any unique scenes in the trailer, but has the most in the gameplay trailer, even providing the first jump scare in the franchise. How's that for symmetry? In this scene, we see Bonnie removing his head, leaving his metal endoskeleton exposed. I don't believe this was ever intended to be in the game, since there's little to no animation in FNAF 1, aside from a few jump scares and Foxy running down the hall. Some of the shots in this trailer are framed as gameplay, such as the camera footage. However, this clip most likely serves simply to create suspense and hype for the upcoming game. Despite not directly being in the game, a frame from this animation was used in an an Easter egg. In the backstage on Cam 5, Bonnie can occasionally be seen staring into the camera in a pose that comes right out of this shot. Another small detail is that Bonnie's lower jaw remains attached to his endoskeleton when he pulls his face off. We know this didn't make it into the finished game, but we do see a similar image of Freddy removing his upper jaw in an Easter egg on Cam 2B. As far as Bonnie though, this is almost exactly how he looks in FNAF 2. So although this scene never made it into this game, it did eventually become a reality. The final detail we get from this trailer isn't clear until after the game was released. Foxy is never shown. Even in the video titled Five Nights at Freddy's Gameplay, which was uploaded almost a month after this trailer, neither Foxy nor Pirate's Cove is ever shown. This is most likely because Foxy was the last character that Scott came up with, stating in his interview with Dawko that the main three characters came naturally, but he struggled when coming up with the fourth character. Considering that he was debating between a wolf, a beaver, and a fox, with the beaver initially being the front runner, Scott was most likely still developing this fourth character by the time the trailer was released. Interestingly, while Scott eventually decided on a fox, we know that he had previously modeled a beaver for his 2013 game Chipper & Sons Lumber Co., which was the inspiration for Five Nights at Freddy's, with critics criticizing the character's designs, comparing them to creepy animatronics. The wolf character was also eventually made into a reality in Security Breach, with Roxanne Roxy Wolf seeming to take Foxy's place in the new group. In a way, these three concepts ended up being the ghosts of FNAF past, present, and future. The Five Nights at Freddy's 2 trailer opens up in a room with children's drawings hung along the wall, with children singing London Bridge is Falling Down in the background. London Bridge, or My Fair Lady, is an old nursery rhyme that some believe to be a metaphor for, get ready for this, human sacrifice. This theory comes from the myth that a bridge would collapse unless a human sacrifice was buried in its foundation to serve as a sort of watchman. Backed by the lyrics "Take the key and lock her up," British folklorist Alice Bertha Gomes suggests that the song features themes of immurement, a method of sacrifice in which a person is left in a room without any exit, children in the lore of the song. This certainly connects to the themes of FNAF, with a popular theory being that William commits his murders in hopes of putting his son back together, similar to how the sacrifices in the story were meant to stop the bridge from collapsing. There's also a game associated with the song, in which two children would hold hands with their arms above their heads while others ran through underneath, with the arms eventually dropping down to catch whoever was running through at the time. This theme of catching an unsuspecting child is also very similar to the story, with the infamous missing children incident being one of the many tragedies shown in this game. Of course, we already knew a bit about the MCI from the first game, but the context of this song gave a subtle hint towards the continuation of that plot weeks before FNAF 2 was released. There was also an early theory that if this song was played in reverse, you could hear the phrase "Mike kill all," which some fans took to mean that Mike Smith was responsible for the MCI. This was most likely the result of overanalyzation and confirmation bias, since, as some fans would point out, the song had been around for centuries, so anything found in the lyrics would be unrelated to the lore. In these drawings, we see most of the popular animatronic characters, including the puppet and Balloon Boy, as well as Toy Foxy being dismantled by two children, and what looks like Golden Freddy standing by a group of kids. This is interesting because while we know Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were part of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it's implied that they were not used in this new restaurant, especially considering Golden Freddy's state in this game. Since Golden Freddy is known to have some sort of supernatural abilities, such as a form of teleportation or spontaneous spiritual manifestation, it's possible that he appeared in the restaurant long enough for one of the children to later reflect on their interaction in these drawings. Another possibility is that this is William wearing an old Fredbear costume, which actually happens in the Silver Eyes continuity during the MCI. Of course, the MCI would have already happened at the previous location, but this account of Golden Freddy in the new restaurant could be foreshadowing William's return in the suit during the later DCI. By the way, wanna buy a book? The books I reference are always linked in the description, and using those links gives a portion of the sale to supporting the channel, so thanks. And they look really good on the shelf. You can also directly support my research by sending me a book off my Amazon wishlist, which helps me to develop my theories, so thanks. You can always ask me or the rest of the community for book recommendations as well in the comments or on the Discord server. If we really analyze this drawing, it tells a familiar story. Golden Freddy is interacting with a singular kid as three others are drawn away toward the sound of music. This is reminiscent of Circus Baby's account of her time on stage, where she mentions that children played in groups of threes and were always rushing in and out of the room, with music always playing down a hall. Of course, eventually Baby is left alone with Elizabeth, where she attacks her. Could that be what's happening here? There's also this drawing of Chica with her mouth wide open in front of a kid. I know we all like to think that Mangle was responsible for the bite of 87, but come on. These drawings, by the way, all say "My Day at the New Freddy Fazbear's Pizza," which initially paints this game as a sequel. At the time, seeing the withered animatronics, which appeared to be broken down versions of the FNAF 1 models, made it seem like FNAF 2 preceded FNAF 1 after some time in deterioration. In the trailer alone, the only clue that this is a prequel is the fact that Phone Guy makes an appearance, considering that he died in the first game. Another subtle way Scott confused us with his trailer trailer is by having it continue exactly where the FNAF 1 trailer left off. As we see, the final scene in the previous trailer shows Bonnie taking his mask off, which is coincidentally exactly where this trailer begins. So I guess Scott was throwing us for loops since the very beginning. In his only voice line in the trailer, Phone Guy says,
"Well, if you're hearing this, then chances are you've made a very poor career choice."
This is reminiscent of the hidden messages in FNAF 1's newspapers, which also show up in this game, writing, "This probably isn't the best choice of a summer job since you most likely won't survive the week." It's hard to know if this line is canon or not since it doesn't appear in the game, and we know from the previous trailer that a lot of material is cut between the trailers and game's release. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Phone Guy is known for making light of everything, but this line gives an explicitly negative description of the job. Plus, knowing that Phone Guy goes on to work essentially the same job a few years later, is this really how he feels? Personally, I don't think this line is canon, but since we don't hear it in the game, it could have been something he said to the guard before us, who we know complained about his work conditions and was moved to the day shift. Here we see more of the withered animatronics with the words forgotten, dismantled, and deactivated shown on the screen. Forgotten refers to the many years that have passed between the previous restaurant and this new grand opening, with the first restaurant staying open for years with almost no business. Due to this, the characters were slowly forgotten until the new restaurant opened, giving them a new look and reminding kids of their favorite cartoon mascots. The word forgotten is also reminiscent of one of Phone Guy's first lines in this game.
"Now, I want you to forget anything you may have heard about the old location."
While the trailer implies that the old characters have been forgotten, Phone Guy makes it clear that the company wants everyone to forget, not about the characters, but the past. Dismantled and deactivated refer to the withered animatronics being taken apart and turned off, although we can see withered Bonnie's endoskeleton light up in the opening shot of the trailer. These animatronics were initially being upgraded for this new restaurant before the company decided they were unfit, leading to them being deactivated. As for dismantled, after the company decided against remodeling them, they salvaged them for parts to use in the new models. In a sort of response to the previous descriptions, the words redesigned, reactivated, and malfunctioning are displayed on the screen toward the end of the trailer. These words don't seem to be exclusively describing the toy animatronics, as the previous words did with the withered ones, but more likely all of them. Redesigned is a follow-up to deactivated, since the old animatronics were decommissioned and replaced by the new toy animatronics. The trailer implies that reactivated refers to the withered animatronics who were previously described as deactivated. Even in the game, we don't get much explanation of how this may have happened, whether the purple guy reactivated them when he was tampering with the toy animatronics, or if they reactivated themselves, being possessed. It's also possible that this was simply a way for the trailer to create suspense, stating that the deactivated and disassembled animatronics were mysteriously reactivated. Withered Bonnie is shown after the word malfunctioning is displayed, but this more likely refers to the new animatronics. In the game, Phone Guy mentions that the older model shouldn't be able to walk around, but he gives us a simple fix in case they do. The toy animatronics, on the other hand, begin acting unusually as time goes on, and were eventually scrapped due to possible malfunctions. As far as the withered animatronics, they could also be described as malfunctioning, but it was primarily the new animatronics that were disobeying their programming. The final message reads, "and 0 doors," which calls back to the theme of immurement in the song London Bridge, in which someone is left in a room with no exits. In this case, Jeremy and later Fritz are literally trapped in a room with no openings, or in Scott's words, 0 doors. This also creates suspense, since in the first game, the doors were the only thing protecting the player from threats. As we'd later learn, this meant that the characters could get a lot closer than they could in the previous game. The trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is one of the more polished yet simpler teasers so far. This trailer features almost no gameplay, extremely vague text, and very basic visuals. The trailer opens up to a wall of drawings and posters, which we later see spread throughout the building in the game, but in a different configuration. I'm not sure why the manager decided to redecorate between the trailer and the game, but it looks nice. This also parallels the opening of the FNAF 2 trailer, with the camera panning through a wall of drawings. Interestingly, the direction that the camera pans in each of these trailers is opposite, which could be a reference to the fact that this game makes a significant jump into the future, while the previous game jumped into the past. It's hard to tell what building we're looking at in the trailers, since the walls and floors in FNAF 1 look almost identical to those in this game, but after playing the game, we can see that this shot is from Cam 05 in FNAF 3, and the company has essentially remade the restaurant inside of this horror attraction. As far as I can tell, we've never seen any of these posters and drawings before, which means they most likely came from the unseen pizzeria we hear about in this game. Their unique design features, such as their buttons, seem to confirm this idea. It's also possible that these posters aren't original, but were made to resemble authentic posters, since they would be around 40 years old if genuine. This venue's uncanny resemblance to an old Freddy Fazbear's Pizza creates an interesting dynamic, with the words "he will come back" appearing on screen, since William's quote-unquote death occurred in a very similar building. Interestingly, we get a shot of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica using what looks like their FNAF 1 models. In a teaser for this game, ScottGames.com featured the words "Five Nights at Freddy's, 30 years later, only only one. Phrases such as "I am still here" and "I remain" were also teased, implying that Springtrap is the last remaining animatronic. Although there was no way to know this at the time, this image likely refers to an event that led up to this game, Follow Me. Sometime before FNAF 3, the animatronics from the last Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were dismantled by William Afton, freeing them of their spirits. So by the time FNAF 3 takes place, Springtrap would be the last possessed animatronic. The phrases "he will come back" and "he always does" either refer to him coming back from the dead or simply the fact that he keeps showing up at Freddy's themed venues to commit murders. However, without a self-explanatory game over screen like the first two games, we can't be sure what happens after Springtrap catches us. As the text appears on screen, it starts as yellow but glitches and fades to red, with a glowing red underline forming beneath. Although we may not have known at the time, this is a clear reference to William's springlock failure, where his yellow suit slowly drenches in blood, with a large red pool growing under him. If this isn't evidence enough, the theme of the text directly relates to this idea, with the words "he will come back" slowly becoming red, a reference to William's lethal setback. We do see William twitching in the suit at the end of the trailer, which seems to portray the events at the end of the Night 5 minigame. The trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's 4 seems to create more questions than answers. The first half of the trailer consists of suspenseful titles and mundane gameplay, which slowly climaxes with a very mediocre appearance of Bonnie. This 30 seconds perfectly parallels the theme of the game. Nothing's there, but we think it is, therefore it is. In the recent Tales from the Pizzaplex story Didophobia, we learn that everything we see is heavily hallucinated. That means that these creatures are really just costumes that move around the house on tracks like a toy train, but the hallucinogenic gas filling the house affects the way we perceive them. We also find out that the creatures turn on at 12 AM, which explains the clock chiming in the background. We do eventually get a glimpse of Bonnie running away, which is basically the turning point of the trailer. Here we transition from maybe nothing's there to maybe if I keep the door shut I won't become a monster Scooby snack. The latter half of the trailer is when the danger appears to become real, which could be the shift from 11:59 to 12 AM. From this point on, we're really just looking at gameplay. This is also the first trailer that doesn't feature anything not in the physical game. No expository animations or cut content. What we saw was what we got. To be fair, this trailer was also released closer to its corresponding game's release than any of the previous games, only 10 days before, meaning that the game was probably finished when the trailer was made. In comparison, Five Nights at Freddy's came out almost 2 months after its trailer. The most mysterious part of this trailer is the titles. These words start red and progressively become more and more glitchy until the second half of the trailer where they reveal their true color, yellow. We know from Didophobia that our player is influenced by hallucinogenic gas, which explains the line, "What is it that you think you see?" This could be William collecting observations regarding his mind-altering tests, similar to how he writes, "Subject continues to react with fear to what he perceives to be creatures" in the novel. William is believed to speak through the player's Fredbear plush in the minigames, using a yellow font color. The trailer uses this color to help the player, alerting him to where his threats are, outside of his doors, in his closet, and on his bed. We see this in the minigames too, with the crying child's Fredbear plush reminding him of where the danger is, even though in both cases the threat is greatly exaggerated if not completely non-existent. We know that the nightmare animatronics are basically mannequins on wheels, and like the mascots, despite the insistence of his plush, pose absolutely no threat. The text glitching from red to yellow could indicate that the player associates this compassionate voice with his plush, his friend, and the harsh, critical voice with someone else, maybe his brother. This is because all of the text presumably comes from the same speaker. They all start in the same color and font, only shifting color when the tone of the voice changes. This could also be the player's internal dialogue, but with the tone and color of the text, it's more likely that the player perceives this voice as his Fredbear plush, thus William Afton, the man conducting these experiments. The first half of the trailer is undoubtedly the most mysterious. While the titles in the latter half seem to simply explain the game's mechanics, the former is filled with philosophical, self-reflecting questions that even to this day I can hardly explain. I did sort of explain the first question, "What is it that you think you see?" which is similar to an observation William makes in Didophobia, with the player's mind being significantly altered, whether by his nightmares, sound illusion, hallucinogens, or a combination thereof. Someone is asking our narrator what he thinks he sees, acknowledging that his answer is probably subjective. Before our first Bonnie appearance, we are asked, "What game do you think you're playing?" This question seems to be directed towards the audience, as I can't imagine how William would relate his previous question to suggesting that the narrator is playing a game. In all of the possible theories regarding the existence of the nightmare animatronics, it's never been implied that the narrator is playing a game, but we are. So even though I believe the previous question is directed towards the player, this one appears to be for us. So in that case, Five Nights at Freddy's 4? Can I have a hint? The final question is, what have you brought home? Which may be an attempt to manipulate the narrator into thinking that these creatures are actually in his house, rather than inside of his dreams. Didophobia describes the experiments as subjecting a victim to the same horrors night after night. Our character in the story, Rory, wakes up to the realization that the creatures are gone, and so is the night. The narrator later goes on to say the nightmare was over, but does Rory think these are nightmares? He describes waking up to the sound of metal scraping something, meaning that he most likely knows or thinks, even though he is right, that this is actually happening around him. That sort of explains the question, what have you brought home? Obviously these characters originate from a restaurant, but somehow they've entered our narrator's home in a nightmarish form. Really, the question here is what, because that answer isn't entirely clear. These things are some sort of monsters in the theme of Fazbear Entertainment characters, but before the game came out, we had no idea why they looked the way they did. They seem to be nightmares, but we know now that they aren't. So what are they? All we have is a name, the Nightmares. As for how they got there, in reality, we know they were set up as part of an experiment, but I think this is more of a rhetorical question. The question implies that the player brought these creatures home, which I believe is the main point of asking this question, to accuse rather than elicit a response, to make the player think that these are real monsters that he let in. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching. Until next time.